G'day guys, today we're doing things a little bit different in that we're actually at home in the kitchen rather than being out in the bush. And today I'm going to talk you through how to season a cast iron cook set. And of course, I'm using the Adventure Kings cast iron cook set, so let's get into it. Now the basic concept behind why you want to season your cast iron cook set is because it can literally last you a lifetime if you look after it correctly. You could literally pass this stuff down to your grandkids if you look after it well. Now all I'm going to be using today is a bit of rice bran oil. You can use any sort of oil as long as it's got a relatively high smoke point. Now rice bran oil has a very high smoke point. Flaxseed oil has an even higher smoke point, and canola oil, which is probably more common in your household, is also a good choice. But again, I'm using this stuff. It says on the can here, it's specialized for barbecue grills and pans and stuff like that, but it's literally at the end of the day, just rice bran oil. I'm also going to be using some paper towels, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So there are a bunch of different ways out there as to how you can season cast iron, but I'm going to just show you the way that I've been taught, and that is in the oven here. As long as you've got a really good heat source, it could be over an open fire, in a barbecue perhaps, but again, I'm going to be using the oven because I've got enough space in there to fit all of this gear in at once. So let's get into it. Okay, so step number one is you want to crank your oven, preheat it to about 230 degrees. Now this is a fan forced oven. If you've got a conventional oven, go a little bit higher, maybe 240, 245. Again, 230, and that's fine. We'll let that heat up and move on to the other step. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wash these up with a bit of mild dish soap and warm water. Now ordinarily you wouldn't want to use dish soap on cast iron if you weren't seasoning it, because it can lead to rust and stuff like that, and you can take the protective layer which we're about to build up. But in my case, I'm going to be seasoning them, which is going to reapply the protective layer, so it's totally fine. Just don't do it super often. Now, as I said earlier, cast iron can literally last you a lifetime. And if you're in the position where you need to restore cast iron, if it's covered in rust, you can just leave it in some vinegar for a few hours, then pick it back out and then use a wire brush on the end of a drill or a hand brush, whichever one works for you. And you can scrub all the rust off and then do exactly what we're doing here today. So I'm taking it pretty easy and I'm just using the scour end on a sponge. Now you might notice here, I'm not just doing the inside of the pan, I'm actually doing the entire thing, the outside, inside, absolutely every nook and cranny. We want to cover absolutely every surface. Sweet, so these are washed up and ready to go. The next step is we've got to get them dry. Now you can pat them down with a bit of paper towel or a tea towel, but don't stress too much because we're actually going to whack them in the oven for a couple of minutes just to bring them up to temperature and get rid of that excess moisture before we actually start oiling. Okay, so these are all dry and they're still a little bit warm, which is totally fine. Now we're on to the fun part, which is the seasoning part. Now we're going to apply a generous amount of the rice bran oil on top of the layers of the cast iron. We're going to cover every single nook and cranny as I mentioned earlier, and we're going to wipe it down with some paper towel and whack it back in the oven for about half an hour. Now, as I said, we're going to be relatively generous with the oil. At the end of the day, we just need a nice thin layer of oil left on top, so that way it can soak into the pores of the steel once it heats up. Now, the idea of putting oil onto the cast iron is the fact that it's not only going to give us a nice protective layer and protect from rust and stuff like that, but it's also going to give us some non-stick qualities. So we want to be relatively generous with the oil, as I mentioned, but we're going to need a nice thin, even layer across all surfaces. We're going to cover absolutely everything inside and out, the lids, absolutely every aspect. Sweet, so now we've got a nice even layer of rice bran oil across all surfaces. We're going to whack it in the oven at 230 degrees for half an hour and just leave them in there and go have a beer or two. Sweet, so the timer's just gone off. They're in there for about 35 minutes. I've left them in there for a little bit longer. Now we just need to take them out, put them on top of somewhere that's not gonna burn. So the stovetop here is gonna be perfect, and just be very, very careful. These are gonna be really, really hot. So get a really thick tea towel, or if you've got a really good oven mitt, and handle them with extreme care, because as I said, they're gonna be absolutely scalding. Okay, sweet. So those are going to cool down now. We're just going to let them cool and become a little bit safer and easier to handle without using this thing so much. So that way, if it does slip and get on our hands, it's not going to burn us. So they've been cooling for about 5 minutes. They're easy to handle and safe to handle, more importantly. Now we just need to repeat the same process all over again. And we're going to do that about 3 or 4 times. So that's all there is to it, guys. About 4 goes in the oven with some oil and you've got a beautiful surface that you can now cook off in your cast iron cooking set, which is also non-stick. Now, as I said earlier, these things can literally last a lifetime if you look after them correctly. So repeat this process every time you get a little bit of rust or a little bit too much food builds up, and you'll have them for a very long time.